The Roman Forum is the most famous public space in the ancient world. It sits in the low ground in the middle of Rome, and for something like 300 years, Romans refused to live on it. They buried their dead there instead. The ground was wrong. It was a valley floor that the hills and the river kept filling with water, and Rome only became a single city when it did two things to that valley: cut a channel to take the water out, and then buried the whole floor under meters of fill to lift it above the flood. Rome isn't built on a plain, it's built on a cluster of steep-sided hills above a bend in the Tiber. The Palatine, Capitoline, Aventine, Caelian, Esquiline, Quirinal and Viminal. That tidy list of 7 is a later civic formalization. An older Roman festival, the Septimontium, named a different 7. Several of them spurs of the Palatine and the Esquiline, and it left out the Capitoline, the Aventine, the Quirinal and the Viminal entirely. The 7 hills were standardized after the fact. The early settlements sat on top of that high ground. Hills are defensible, and, more to the point here, hills are dry. Because between them there was a problem. Streams running off the Esquiline, the Viminal and the Quirinal all drained down into one low valley. And that valley had nowhere to send the water except the Tiber, which, whenever the river came up, sent it straight back. You will usually hear that valley called a swamp. Recent geoarchaeology argues that's too strong. Coring down through the layers under the Forum suggests that in the early 1st millennium BC, this was a seasonally dry floodplain, not a permanent body of standing water, wet in winter, workable in summer, and periodically flooded hard. That is a live correction to the older textbook picture. The traditional marsh description comes from Roman writers and a century of popular retellings. The sediment cores are what's revising it, which for anyone trying to build is arguably worse than a swamp. A swamp you avoid permanently. A floodplain lets you build and then takes the ground back. And we know what early Romans used it for instead, because it is still down there. Underneath the Forum, archaeologists found a burial ground, Iron Age graves, in use from roughly the 10th to the 8th century BC. Before this was the center of a city, it was where the living put the dead, which is a very ordinary thing to do with land nobody wants. In the 6th century BC, that changed. Tradition credits Rome's Etruscan kings, Tarquinius Priscus, around 600 BC, with cutting a drainage channel through the valley down to the river. That attribution comes from Roman authors writing centuries afterwards. No inscription dates the work. The archaeology is consistent with a 6th century project. It does not independently prove the king or the year. The important part isn't who, it's what it was. It started as an open channel, essentially a canalized stream following water that already ran that way, walled in stone so that it kept running where it had been put. Only much later, from around the 3rd century BC, was it roofed over with stone vaulting and turned into the buried tunnel people picture. This is the Cloaca Maxima. The name means the greatest sewer, though at the beginning it wasn't a sewer at all. It was a storm drain. Its job was to take the hill runoff and the standing water off the valley floor and put it in the Tiber. Draining it was not enough on its own, because the real problem was elevation. So they fixed the elevation. Across the 6th century BC, the valley floor was buried, deliberately, under imported fill. Earth, rubble and gravel packed down across the whole hollow. Cores taken through the Forum find archaic ground surfaces several meters below the pavement that later Romans walked on. The valley was physically lifted out of the flood, and that is the point where the famous part actually begins. With dry, level, stable ground in the middle of the hills, the separate hilltop communities finally had somewhere neutral to meet. A market, then a meeting place, then temples, a senate house, and the political center of a Mediterranean empire, all of it standing on made ground, over a graveyard. Walling the whole city in took another 2 centuries. The circuit we call the Servian Wall is traditionally credited to a 6th century king, but the wall you can still find fragments of was built in the early 4th century BC, after the Gauls sacked Rome in 390. The Cloaca Maxima gets called the oldest sewer in the world. It isn't. Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley had covered brick drains roughly 2,000 years earlier. What it has a much better claim to is being one of the oldest that still works. Parts of the ancient channel, not all of it. Plenty is blocked, silted or bypassed, still carry rainwater off the historic centre and into the Tiber, tied into Rome's modern drainage. And you can go and look at the end of it, a stone arch in the river embankment near the Ponte Palatino, beside the broken stump of the old Pons Aemilius. Rome has better ruins than that. It doesn't have an older one still doing its job. And the shape of the city is still the shape of the original problem. Hills around a hollow with the most famous square in the world sitting at the bottom of it, on ground Rome had to build before it could stand on it. If you like the strange places borders end up, subscribe. There's a new one every week.